What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to something that I haven't done in a while. We're sitting at the computer screen today and we're going to be doing a little bit of a lecture or a guide. These are a style of video that I used to make every now and then, and I've kind of gotten away from doing those, but I had a particular topic that I kind of wanted to discuss in depth today. And this is kind of being sparked by a lot of comments on videos and or DMs and then questions from clients as well. I think at this point it's pretty unanimously understood that we need to be progressively overloading within the gym in order to be building muscle and creating the adaptation that we need in order to get the result that we want. But I think that there are some misconceptions around progressive overload. And what I'm really hoping to do with this video today is to make progressive overload a simple topic that is easy for you guys to understand. So that you guys can take that knowledge and then apply that into your own training and maybe answer some of the questions that you may have for yourself in terms of progressive overload and all of the things that entails. So to just kind of give you guys a general idea of what we're going to be going over today, we're going to start by talking about what progressive overload even is and why we need to progressively overload in the gym in order to build muscle. We're going to talk about how you can do that. There are various ways that you can go about eliciting progressive overload. And I just kind of want to talk about some of those options and then give examples of each one. And then from there, we'll start to look at some real life in gym application. And there are two methods or models of progression that I like to think of and use with myself and with clients. And those would be what I call the ladder model and the micro-loading model. And we'll kind of go over both of those and some of the differences between those. And then we'll take a look at some other considerations and some other things to keep in mind when it comes to taking this knowledge and then applying that within the gym. So before we talk about progressive overload and the various ways that you can go about creating that adaptation, I think that we need to understand what progressive overload is and then kind of take a step further to understand why it is that we need to be progressively overloading in the gym. In its simplest form, progressive overload is the gradual increase in the intensity of your exercise, of your training sessions. Simply put, your workouts need to get harder over time in order for your body to continue to adapt and grow from those workouts. One of the things that I kind of have a personal pet peeve on is the misunderstanding of progressive overload. And very often I will have people who will either send me a message or maybe I'll read it in a comment section or I'll overhear a conversation in the gym where someone will say, "Oh, you do progressive overload training," or what do you think about progressive overload training? And I want to make it very clear that progressive overload is not a style of training. It is a law of all training programs that must be followed. Whether you are a bodybuilder training for hypertrophy, or whether you are a traditional ball sport athlete, football, baseball, basketball, and you're training for athletic development and hand-eye coordination and explosiveness, whether you're a CrossFitter and you're training for a unique blend of muscular endurance as well as strength, whether you're a power lifter and you're training for all-time absolute 1 rep max strength, no matter how it is that you train and what your focus is within the gym, Progressive overload is a rule that your training program must abide by in order to give you the result that you are seeking after. So I just want to make it very clear that progressive overload is not a style of training. Anyone who tells you, if you train with me, we're going to do progressive overload training, or anybody that's trying to maybe put out an ebook on progressive overload training. Progressive overload is not a style. It is a rule and a law of training that all successful training programs must obey in order for the trainee, you, to get the result that you are looking for from that training program. So we understand what progressive overload is, but I think we need to take it a little further and understand why it is that we need progressive overload to happen. Why do our workouts need to get harder? Why can we not just do the same workouts over and over and over again and continue to get the same response? Muscle growth is simply an adaptation to a stimulus. And I kind of want you guys to think about this as the same way that you would think about a callus. I'm not sure how well these are kind of picking up on the camera, but if you're a seasoned weightlifter like myself, you probably have calluses all over your hands. And when you think about what a callus is a small tearing or breaking in the skin that builds back stronger over time so that your body can try to fight off the stimulus and the damage that we place on it. Our body is always going to adapt to the stresses that get placed on the body so that it can survive and it can try to withstand those stressors. A really good example that I heard from Dorian Yates would be if you took let's say a knife or a piece of sandpaper and you rubbed it on your hand and your hand got cut up and it got bloody. If you let that skin grow back, that skin is going to grow back thicker and stronger than what it was before you had scuffed it up with the sandpaper, very similar to the calluses. But if you scratch that area again before it has recovered, you're not giving your body the time that it needs to recover from that initial stress so that it can give you the adaptation that you are looking for. So this is a cycle. You place a stress on your body experiences some short-term damage from that stress, and then your body recovers from that stress, but it recovers slightly stronger than what it was before. And that adaptation is muscle growth. And then that process repeats itself over and over and over. If there is no stress that is being placed on your body, in this case, the muscle, there is no adaptation that is going to take place. And remember that muscle growth is an adaptation. Muscle growth is not the stimulus. The stimulus is the training and the stress that you are placing on the muscle. And then the adaptation, the muscle growth that you get, is a response from that stress. So if you are continuously placing the same level of stress on your body, eventually, maybe the first couple of times, your body will be able to adapt to that stress and it will kind of super compensate and it will build some muscle. But for example, if you're doing a bench press and you're doing 200 pounds for 10 reps, and every week you go into the gym and you only do 200 pounds for 10 reps, eventually that stress is going to be something that your body is used to and that it will have completely adapted to. And that stress will no longer be sufficient enough to cause an adaptation, muscle growth. And therefore, the training is not intense enough in order to get your body to grow from it. Muscle growth is essentially your body being placed into survival mode. You are, for lack of a better word, tearing your muscles down and you are forcing your body to go, hey, we have to replace this muscle or we're going to lose it or it's going to become damaged or torn. And by constantly forcing yourself to do things in the gym that you have never done before, you will constantly be placing your body in survival mode. And when your body is constantly in survival mode, it is constantly trying to adapt, aka grow, from the training and the stimulus that you are placing on the muscle. Probably one of the best examples of progressive overload comes from Greek legend, in particular, the tale of Milo of Croton. Milo was a Greek athlete. We're going way back in the day here to the early days of the Olympics, and Milo was a multiple time winner of the Olympic wrestling. And one of the tales that is told of him, whether or not this is true or not, is in order to train for the Olympics, Milo would begin his training by picking up a baby calf, which is what you can kind of see on the left-hand side picture, and walking up a hill with it every single day over the course of the 4-year training period for the Olympics. And as you can imagine, every day the calf would grow a little bigger and get a little older and get a little heavier, which would mean that Milo would be carrying more weight slowly over time, aka progressive overload. And by the time that the calf had fully developed into a full-grown bull, Milo's body had adapted to the slow, gradual increase of the body weight, and Milo was able to carry the bull himself. Again, whether or not this is actually historically correct or not, I think is less relevant. I think the main reason why I'm kind of bringing this example up is because it kind of paints a picture of what progressive overload actually looks like in real life, starting with a relatively smaller, easy task, and then slowly, incrementally increasing the intensity of that task, in which your body slowly but incrementally adapts and grows to that task, which allows you to be able to complete that task as your body goes through it. So I hope by now you have a general understanding of what progressive overload is and why we need to consistently progressive overload in the gym. And from here, I kind of want to actually get into some real examples. What are some different ways that you can actually go about progressively overloading? And there are 6 main ways that you can go about progressively overloading within the gym. As we'll discuss in the next slide, I don't think that all of these ways are always applicable. And I do think that there are certain areas of progressive overload that we should focus on more than others. But nevertheless, there are still a couple different options that you can use in order to progressive overload. So the first thing would be load, obviously, adding more weight onto the bar, kind of going back to the example of Milo. That seems to be the most common one that people are familiar with. If you can bench 200 pounds today and 6 months from now you can bench 230 pounds, you have progressively overloaded via increasing the weight on the bar. You can also progressive overload through reps. So kind of using that bench press example, if you're bench pressing 200 pounds for 10 reps, you could always increase the weight from 200 pounds to 205, or you could stick with the 200 pounds and you could go from 10 reps to 11, and then 11 to 12, and then 12 to 13, so on and so forth. We can also increase your exercise execution and have better form and target the muscle better. So let's say that you're doing something like a lateral raise and you're doing the 20-pound dumbbells and you're getting 10 reps with them, but your form is terrible. Let's say you're just kind of throwing the weight around. There isn't much of a peak contraction at the top of the lift, and maybe you're not even getting much of a pump or an internal connection with the muscle itself. Simply tightening up the form and forcing the target muscle to be the thing that takes the brunt of the tension of the exercise, that in itself could be a form of progressive overload. So sticking with the bench press example, if you are doing 200 pounds for 10 reps, but maybe next week you do 200 pounds for 7 reps, but those 7 reps, each rep is a slightly more controlled eccentric with a hard contraction and lockout of the pecs at the top. And when you finish the 200 by 7 set, the pump and the feel that you get in your pecs is considerably better than what the 200 for 10 was. I am inclined to believe that the less rep with better form and higher connection with the target muscle is a more productive set for hypertrophy purposes. Another way would be to increase the number of sets that you're doing. If you're doing the leg extension for 3 sets, you could very simply add a 4th set onto that, which would increase the overall total volume and the overall workload, and that in itself would be a form of progressive overload. You could also increase the frequency in which you're training, which would mean hitting the same workouts maybe a little bit closer together. So let's say that you were doing a upper lower split where you were training every other day, upper rest, lower rest. Instead, if you just bring those workouts closer together and go upper lower rest, upper lower rest, you then go from hitting those muscles every 3 to 4 days to hitting them, every 4 days to hitting them every 3. And by increasing the frequency and getting one less rest day in between the workouts, you're getting more workouts in over the course of a week, a month, a year, which will create a net progressive overload stimulus at the end of any particular period of time. And then the final way would be to increase workout density, which simply means getting the same amount of work done in a shorter time period. So let's again use the bench press example, and let's say that you did 3 sets of 200 pounds, and from set 1 to set 2 it took you 15 minutes to complete that. If you were to complete those same 3 sets with the same weight and reps in, let's say, 12 minutes or 10 minutes, you are getting the same lifting stimulus, but that stimulus is being placed in a shorter period of time, and therefore the density of the training is higher, and that in itself could be another form of progressive overload. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I think that there are some of those forms of progressive overload that are a little bit more applicable than other ones. In particular, I think that sets, in increasing the number of sets that you have, training frequency and training density are a little bit less important than the other 3 that were mentioned. And just to kind of maybe explain that and potentially debunk some ways for some of these other ways could be applicable for progressive overload. When we take a look at the sets, there is going to be a ceiling of how many sets that we can do before we overextend our ability to recover. And for those of you who are kind of familiar with a lot of the literature and the terminology, the term junk volume is kind of what gets thrown around. So let's say that you're doing 3 sets of bench press, and then you increase to 4 sets, and then maybe the next week you increase to 5 sets. There may be a certain window where you can increase the number of sets, but eventually, let's say you're getting to the point where you're doing 10 sets of bench press. There is eventually going to be a ceiling on how many sets that you can do before the latter sets of the exercise start to regress and potentially not be as strong when it comes to the stimulus overall. Frequency can be changed, but oftentimes, especially nowadays, a lot of people are training at very high frequencies already. So if you're someone who is training with, let's say an upper lower frequency where you're training upper lower rest, realistically, the only way that you could increase the frequency of that would be to do a full body split and go to training things every other day. But realistically, a lot of people watching this video may already be doing upper lower training, full body training every other day. And so realistically, being able to increase your frequency for people who are maybe doing a push pull leg split, and especially for people who are doing like a bro split or a body part split, you are going to be able to adjust that frequency. But for people like me who are doing full body training, I'm already hitting my muscles at every other day frequency. I could not possibly hit them any more frequently than that, except for every single day, which doesn't allow for any recovery time. And then workout density. I really only think that workout density is applicable when your time is pressed. Maybe you get to the gym and it closes in 45 minutes and you have to try and make your workout a little bit quicker. Let's say you finish that workout and you didn't necessarily get any stronger or any weaker on any of your exercises. You just simply matched last week's performance, but you got the workout done a little bit shorter. That would be a good metric for measuring progressive overload in a situation like that. But ideally, in a perfect world, I would rather have a lifter focus on making their rest times a little bit longer so that they can put more effort into each set, and not really focus on trying to get the workout done as quick as they can possibly get it done because I just find when speed is your main focus, you tend to rush the rest times and start your sets with a little bit more oxygen debt and everything that just doesn't necessarily need to be there. So that leaves what I believe to be the three main ways that we should be focusing on eliciting progressive overload in the gym. Number one would be execution. Everyone who's watching this video can execute their lifts better, even me. Now, obviously, there is going to be a point where maybe exaggerating the eccentric more than you already are may not provide any necessary stimulus. Obviously, there may be a point where you are a very skilled lifter who has been training for a very long time and you have picture perfect form on every lift that you're doing, but there is a very high statistical chance that if you're watching this video, that is not you. So execution is always something that we can improve, and simply tightening up your exercises, having better form, targeting and feeling the target muscle work better is always going to be a way that we can progressively overload. And then load and reps. We can always get stronger. Unless you are using a machine that physically limits you from adding more weight onto the machine, you are always going to be able to get stronger on your exercises. And strength comes in multiple ways. Strength comes in increasing the load and simply adding more weight to the machine, but strength also comes with adding reps. Let's say that you're doing the adductor with a gym pin and you've got the gym pin completely maxed out. Realistically, you're not able to add more weight onto that machine. But if you have the machine maxed out for as heavy as it will go and you're hitting it for 10 reps, hit it for 12, and then hit it for 15, and then hit it for 18, and then hit it for 20, and then hit it for 22. We know that muscle hypertrophy occurs anywhere between 5 and 30 reps, and I'm inclined to believe that it may occur slightly higher than that too, as long as you're training hard and you're training to or close to failure. That is the main driver of muscle growth, is the intensity and the proximity to failure within each set that you're doing. So simply adding more load and or repetitions to the exercise is a foolproof way to progressive overload. And a training program, a lot of you guys may be thinking, well, you can't get linearly stronger. I feel like that's a common thing that I'll hear people say. And I do think to a certain extent that is the truth. You're not always going to be able to go into the gym and increase the weight every single week. Plateaus may happen along the way, but a training program is a roadmap that will allow you to continue to get stronger without those plateaus getting in your way. A lot of these training programs are set up to allow you hypothetically to get stronger infinitely, and simply setting up your program through managing rest, volume, frequency, all of the variables that can be played with is how you go about navigating around those roadblocks, which will allow you to continue to progressive overload and continuously get stronger and add load reps to the bar, or stick with the same weight for the same number of reps and use better form on that exercise. All right, we've done a lot of blabbering up until this point. Let's look at two methods or models that I like to use with myself and with clients when it comes to progressively overloading in the gym. And there are two main ways that I kind of like to think about this. The first one would be what I refer to as the ladder method. And then the second method would be what I refer to as the micro loading method. In its simplest form, the ladder method is simply working in a rep range and building those reps up until you hit the top end of that rep range, which will then prompt you to increase the weight. Typically, when you increase the weight, especially with how much you increase the weight by, that is going to show a slight decrease in your repetitions, in which you will then build those reps back up again until you hit the top end, and then you will add weight and then repeat. So the total process is to build up in weight, add weight, build up in reps, add weight, build up in reps, add weight, which to me, I kind of just picture kind of as a little bit of a ladder. And just to kind of see this drawn out a little bit, I'm using the bench press example quite a bit, but let's just say that you have a program for me and I'm having you do the bench press in the 5 to 8 rep range. And the first week of the training program, you hit 225 pounds for 5 reps. And then because this weight is within your rep range, you are going to stick with this weight until you hit the top end of the rep range. So the next week you maybe hit that 225 for 6 reps, and then the next week you hit that 225 for 7 reps, and then finally on week 4 you hit that 225 for 8 reps. Congratulations, you have hit 8 reps, which is the top end of the rep range. And because you have hit the top end of the rep range, this would be where you would increase the weight. And I would always recommend that you increase the weight by the smallest increment possible, which in most cases would be about 5 pounds or maybe 2 kilos for the European listeners. Most gyms are going to have like 1 kilo plate or 2.5 pound plates, and that would be what you would add on. Usually, when you increase the weight, you are going to see a decrease in reps. There may be times where you add 5 pounds and then the next week you hit 230 for 8, and then maybe the next week you do 235 for 8, but that is not going to be constant. If you were able to add 5 pounds every week, you would put 250 pounds on your lifts every year, and no one is doing that. So very often what happens is the weight increase will show a decrease in the repetitions. So maybe you take that 230 to failure on week 5 and you only hit that for 5 reps. So you're now back at the bottom of the ladder, in which you will then build up week after week to 6 reps, 7 reps, and then eventually you'll hit that 230 for 8. Once you hit that 230 for 8, you would add another 5 pounds. The repetitions would drop back down. You would then build them back up to 8 and then add another 5 pounds, which would have the reps drop down, and you just repeat, 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 repeat. The micro-loading method, on the other hand, is very similar, but usually what is happening with the micro-loading method is that the weight that you're increasing by is considerably smaller than the ladder method. So instead of working in a rep range, remember that the bench press example, we were working in the 5 to 8 rep range, where you have a rep range that you work in. Usually, if I'm going to use a micro loading method, I'm very specific on the number of repetitions that I would use, and say maybe only 8 reps, and I would have a little bit less of a rep range. Or maybe the rep range is like 7 or 8 reps, instead of having 5, 6, 7, 8. would only have like 7 or 8. So we either have a very specific rep number that we're working with, or we're still working with a rep range, but that range is considerably narrower. And as I kind of mentioned, the increases in load that you would make would be much smaller. And for me, these are anywhere from 1/4 to 1 pound, which would be anywhere from 0.1 to 0.5 kilograms for the non-American listeners. And usually what happens because of the smaller increase in weight is that we get a smaller rep drop off, which would then lead to higher levels of total volume. And total volume is just simply taking the weight by the repetitions. So going back to the previous example here, when you compare the stimulus between week 4 and week 5, in week 4 we hit 225 pounds for 8 reps, which would be 1,800 pounds of total volume. In week 5, we did increase the weight, so the weight is heavier, but the repetitions are less. And if you actually math that out, the 230 for 5 set is only 1,150 pounds of total volume. So even though the 230 set is heavier, it is less total volume than the 225 set for more repetitions. Now, I think that there's some discussion and debate as to whether or not this is relevant for hypertrophy, but I do think it is something that is still worth mentioning, is that when you increase the weight, if your reps drop off too much, that may lead to a decrease in total volume. And this is also going to require the purchase of or access to the fractional plates. Most gyms, at least in the United States, are going to have 2.5 pound plates, but there are a lot of gyms that don't even have those. And you need to train at a very hardcore gym in order to have access to the fractional plates, the 1/4 pound plate, 1/2 pound plate, 3/4 pound plate. Very often you're going to have to buy those and actually carry those with you when you get into the gym. So what this would look like, just still sticking with the rep range example for the sake of the discussion, the first week with the bench press, you hit 225 for 5 and then turn it into 6, then a week after 7, and then 8. And then in the ladder method, you would increase the weight by 5 pounds from 225 to 230, but with the this is supposed to be the micro load method. This is a typo here. But with the micro load method, instead of adding 5 pounds, we only add 1 pound, and we go from 225 to 226. And because the amount of weight that we have increased is a lot less, your body, from my experience, is easier to adapt to that load increase. And then instead of going down in repetitions, I have found that I'm very often able to keep my repetitions the exact same while adding small amounts of weight. So instead of going from 225 for 8 to 230 for 5 and then having to spend however many weeks building that back up into 8 repetitions, I can just go from 225 for 8 to 226 for 8 to 227 for 8, 228, 229, 230, 231, 232. You kind of see where I'm going with that. So these are kind of the two main methods that I like to use, and the two main progression models that I like to use when it comes to actually looking at your logbook in real life and being able to plan out how you're going to progress these lifts on a long-term basis. After discussing two different models and schemes that you could use for progressive overloading, which one should you pick? In my opinion, I think that we should use both of them. And I think that there are some certain instances where the latter method is a little bit more appropriate. There are some certain instances where the micro-loading method is a little bit more appropriate. And then there are some instances where you may need to use both of those. And I just kind of want to give some examples for all of those. The latter method, for example, I find this to be very applicable with dumbbell exercises, cable exercises, and or single joint machine movements, which would maybe be like a machine lateral raise or a machine preacher curl, because you are going to be limited by the amount of weight that you can increase the exercise by, particularly with dumbbell exercises. Most gyms, the dumbbells are only going to go up in 5-pound increments. So you're going to go from the 5s to the 10s to the 15s to the 20s to the 25s to the 30s. There are gyms out there that have 2.5 pound dumbbell increments, but those are statistically much less frequent than 5-pound increments. So you going from the 25-pound dumbbell on, say, your lateral raise to the 30-pound dumbbell is a 20% weight increase, which is a much, much larger weight percentage increase relative to a compound exercise. Just to kind of give you guys an idea of what that would look like, if you increase the weight by 20% on the 225-pound bench press, you would be adding 45 pounds. So you would never hit 225 for 8 and then say, okay, I'm going to go from 225 to 270. That would be absolutely ridiculous. That 20% weight increase would be way excessive and would show a tremendous drop off in reps. But with dumbbell exercises, that is what you're limited to, and cable machines as well. A lot of your cable machines, they're going to be 5-pound weight stacks, 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds. So you may be able to hit the 15 pound for 10 reps, but when you jump up to 20 pounds, you may be able to only hit that for 2 or 3 reps. So in an instance like that, I like to build up the reps quite a bit higher, because I know when I increase the weight, I'm going to get a much bigger drop off, because the percentage of weight increase is a greater percentage relative to a compound exercise. And so I kind of need to have a large range of repetitions that I'm working through, so that when I make that weight increase and the reps inevitably drop down, what they drop down to is still within the rep range of what I'm trying to work in. The microloading method I find works really good with compound exercises or multi-joint machine exercises. So a single joint machine would maybe be something like, again, a preacher curl, where we're only seeing movement happening at one joint. A multi-joint compound exercise would maybe be something like a chest press or a hack squat or a pendulum squat, something where multiple muscle groups are being involved at one time and there are multiple moving parts on there. And because of that, I have kind of found that you can consistently add smaller amounts of weight, very similar to the bench press example that I gave here. This example of being able to add 1 pound every week and keep your reps the exact same is something that I have seen happen for years with myself and with my clients. Is with a lot of those exercises, you can add smaller amounts of weight every single week and keep your repetitions exactly where they are. And that very rarely works out with a lot of your dumbbell and cable exercises there. But I do think that those cable and single joint machines may be exercises where you need to both microload and ladder up into a rep range. And another drawn out example of this would be maybe doing like a single arm cable curl. Think about a single arm cable curl, guys. I mean, even the strongest guy in your gym is going to be doing 30, 40, 50 pounds single arm curls at absolute max if he's using good form with them. So a single joint compound or a single joint unilateral isolation exercise would be a very good example for this. Let's say that the rep range of that cable curl is the 5 to 10 rep range, and in week 1 you hit 25 pounds for 10 reps. Now, because this is a cable machine, I would only increase 1 pound instead of 5. As I said earlier, we're trying to avoid that 20% load increase, which is going to show a huge drop off in reps. So I only add 1 pound to the machine. And very often with compound exercises, if I only add 1 pound, the reps will usually stay the same. They won't drop. But even 1 pound on a 25-pound exercise is still a 25% weight increase. Excuse me. Wow, my math is terrible. That's a 4% weight increase, which still may show a drop off in reps. So even though I only go from 25 pounds to 26, my reps may still drop from 10 to 7, even though it was only a 1 pound increase. And then in this instance, I would ladder up the 26-pound weight week after week from 7 to 8 to 9 to 10. I'm eventually going to hit the 26 pounds for 10 reps, and then once again increase by 1 pound, going from 26 to 7, which then shows the drop off, which I then ladder back up into 27 for 10. So I'm still going from 25 for 10 to 26 for 10 to 27 for 10, but with the compound exercise, I'm usually able to do that every single week, whereas with a single joint isolation exercise, there may be 3 to 4 weeks in between the weight increase where the reps drop and I have to build and ladder them back up into 10 reps again. So there are certain exercises where I think that you can make your weight increases a little bit heavier. And in a lot of cases with dumbbells, you have to make them heavier. And then you'll see reps drop off, which you then build back up. There are exercises where you can make very small weight increases and keep your total number of reps a little bit more static. And then there are exercises like these where you have to do both. You have to make very small weight increases and you need to ladder those reps back up before you make another small weight increase. So I think that all of these progressive overload models work, and I think that it's more a question of which tool that you're going to use for that particular exercise that you're working with. Before we wrap this up, I just kind of want to discuss a couple of things to consider. So as we've kind of discussed, I do believe that weight and reps is probably the most prevalent and logical way for you to go about eliciting progressive overload in the gym. However, please keep in mind that execution and form is also one of those methods. And I am a huge proponent that increasing your logbook for weight and reps should never, ever come at the expense of your form. At the end of the day, guys, this is bodybuilding, and we are trying to get stronger so that that strength translates into muscle growth. And what I'm seeing happen a lot with people on social media, and I'm seeing happen a lot with clients of mine, is that they are so hyper-focused on getting stronger that they don't notice that their form is changing. So maybe, I'm using the bench press example again, maybe in the first week they hit 225 pounds for 10 reps, and then 2 months later they're hitting 245 pounds for 10 reps. But when you compare the 225 to the 245, maybe the 225 had a 4-second eccentric with full range of motion with the bar touching the chest and then a full hard lockout at the top. But maybe over the course of them building up from 225 to 245, now maybe their negative has gotten quicker and it's gone from 4 seconds to 3 seconds. And then maybe instead of getting that bar all the way down to their chest and getting a full stretch in the pec, now they're stopping slightly short. And then maybe instead of getting that full contraction at the top and contracting their pecs, maybe they're also stopping a little bit short. So the tempo has gotten worse. They have sped up the negative and they're shortchanging their range of motion. This is way more common than I think that people are leading on to believe. It is just so common. I'm seeing this everywhere where people, I'm watching videos on my TikTok of 17-year-old kids who are doing a hamstring curl with the full stack on the machine and a gym pin and 5 plates on the fucking gym pin, but they have no hamstring muscles. So what is getting lost in translation is that people are under the impression that simply just getting stronger is going to lead to muscle growth. And it does if you are able to accurately keep that tension in the weight in the target muscle. If you can keep lying leg curl as an example, if you're doing 100 pounds and that is making your hamstrings scream, but when you jump up to 120 pounds, you don't feel your hamstrings anymore, even though the weight is lighter with the 100 pounds, you're going to have a better stimulus within the target muscle because you're able to actually recruit the fibers of that muscle. And then slowly over time, you'll build up to being able to hit that 120 pounds with the same form that you were previously hitting that 100 pounds with however many weeks ago. But I'm seeing a lot of people who are hitting 100 pounds. Great, let's hit 120, and then let's hit 140. And they're extremely strong, and it's impressive. But if you're a bodybuilder, the strength that you have doesn't mean anything if it's not correlating to muscle tissue on your body. So that's kind of where we need to keep in mind that the form is your number one priority. The weight that you're using and the reps that you're getting with that weight does not mean anything if you're not using the target muscle to move that weight. And one of the biggest cues and things that I like to give with this is to keep your tempo standardized from the beginning of the set to the end of the set, and then week after week after week. If you're keeping everything the same, consistent, standardized week to week to week, and you're getting stronger, you know that the reason why you're getting stronger is because the muscles are adapting and you're getting the stimulus and the adaptation that you want and need in order for the muscles to grow. But if you're starting off maybe doing a 4-second eccentric, and then at the last couple reps of the set, you do a 2-second eccentric so that you can kind of grind out those last couple reps. Or going back to the example that I said earlier, maybe in the first week of your program, you're doing a 4-second negative. And then as the weeks go on, you've slowly turned that into 3.5, 3 seconds, 2.5. Keeping your form and your tempo standardized and holding that above all else is going to be a great way to make sure that you're actively and actually progressively overloading as accurately as possible. Remember, we do not want to progress our logbook because we changed our form. We want that progression in the logbook to come from muscle tissue, and that happens by keeping everything consistent and everything standardized. And then the final consideration is that I recommend everyone watching this video to invest, and I use the word investment loosely, in a pair of fractional plates. I am going to leave some links in the description of this video for some American and European sellers for fractional plates. And if you don't have these, I very strongly recommend that you invest $30 US, which I don't consider that to be an investment. I would strongly consider you guys to invest in some fractional plates, because I believe there's something that every serious lifter should have, and they should carry them with in their gym. The gym that I train at now has fractional plates in the gym, but I bought my own fractional plates and I carried my own fractional plates in the gym with me for 4 years before I started training in this gym. And I even have pairs of magnetic fractional plates for cable exercises. I really truly believe that the fractional plates are a cheat code for progressive overload, and they're a way to make your progressions happen in kind of a less daunting and a less intimidating way. You know, when you kind of think about, okay, I'm going to go from 200 pounds to 250 pounds, you know, that is a lot of 5-pound increases, reset the reps and build those back up, versus the fractional plates kind of allow you to take all of the baby steps in between. You're not going from 200 to 205 to 210 to 215. You're going from 200 to 201, 202, 203, 204, 205. And you're making those increases smaller every week, which leads to less drop off, and also going back to making sure that you're keeping the tension in the muscle. If you're adding too much weight too quickly, it's going to be very difficult for you to keep the reps standardized, because your nervous system is like freaking out. Holy shit, we added 10 pounds to this exercise this week and it feels considerably heavier than what it did last week, versus the 1-pound increases are so small that you hardly even notice that they're there. very often you don't notice that you're there. You're just adding a small amount of weight, and the next thing you know, you look back on your logbook and you go, damn, I've put 7 pounds on this lift in the last 7 weeks, because every week you just added a teeny amount of weight and a teeny amount of weight and a teeny amount of weight, and it was never too much or too aggressive of a weight increase all at one time, and you kind of gave your body more of a chance to be able to adapt to that extra weight. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this video here. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. I had a lot of fun going through a video like this, kind of like a lecture or a guide. As always, if you guys have any questions or suggestions for future video topics, I am all ears. I would love to make videos for things that you guys want to see. If any of you guys are interested in coaching or consultations or customized training or nutrition programs, I have all of that stuff on my website, which is here, or also in the description of the video. If you guys have not subscribed to the channel already, I recommend that you do, so that we can get more videos like these out for you guys. And as always, guys, train hard and take care of yourselves.